Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, potentially, if you're joining us still from California. This is Stephanie Mercier with CSH, and I am joined also from CSH by Annie Bacci, as well as, I know folks will get a chance to introduce themselves, but we are delighted to be co-facilitating with NCCD, and Deirdre O'Connor is on the line as well. So we have put together an agenda for today that we hope will really be an opportunity for some collaborative discussion and conversation, and we'll rely on all of us kind of being willing to speak up and share, which I know is sometimes a little challenging on these webinar-style formats. So in the interest of hearing from folks, we'll at least take an initial round of kind of going around to each of you and asking for your thoughts. But certainly not intended to put anyone on the spot, just to kind of make sure that we get an opportunity from everyone. So as we were working together with NCCD to think about some of the pieces of the puzzle that might be beneficial to talk about with this group, and in a moment we'll go through and do introductions and actually hear who's on the line together with us. A few things that kind of rose to the top. One is this idea of now that the field has evolved a little bit and is not quite as nascent as it was, seemed like it could be interesting to kind of collectively take the temperature of what we're hearing out there from folks, particularly as a number of us have been recently putting out or RFPs and or announcing recipients and some of those other pieces of the puzzle. So we'll be curious to hear kind of what folks are hearing and seeing and kind of what's working in terms of outreach to the extent that any of your strategies may have shifted. And then also NCCD has had some particular experiences that they're willing to share in terms of outreach to tribal communities, which again seemed like it might be relevant to a number of us in terms of those engagement efforts. And then also an opportunity to think through this kind of question about transition from one stage to the next as well, and have a chance to kind of hear from folks about how we think through that as well. So that is a rough idea for an agenda. And Jenny, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, we can just kick ourselves off by hearing who's on the line. I know we can see it to some extent on the WebEx, but sometimes folks show up as the ever mysterious call-in user number 4 or 5. So in the interest of just making sure we have a sense who's here, I put up a roll call list, and I should say if anyone is missing from the list, I promise you it was not intentional. I did the best I could with looking at the SIF website, but if you are not on here and you should be, we will definitely make sure that we get to you. So who do we have on the line for Green and Healthy Homes?
You got Michael McKnight.
Excellent. All right, anyone else? Okay. How about the Harvard Kennedy School? All right, looks like they may be joining us a little bit later. Always a lot going on a Monday morning or afternoon. How about the Institute for Child Success?
Mary Garvey.
Wonderful. And how about with LISC?
Bryson Brown.
You have Anna Sukowski.
Great. The Nonprofit Finance Fund?
This is Kim Bailey.
And you get Brian Lamondon as well.
Wonderful. How about social finance?
Hi, you have Rachel Levy, Rashmi Kare, and Teresa Doherty.
Wonderful. Okay, and how about from the Sorensen Impact Center?
Hi there, you have Katie Reberg and Katie Jowers.
Excellent. How about with third sector? Okay, looks like third sector may not have had a chance to join us yet. And then I put us as co-facilitators last, but how about with NCCD?
Deirdre O'Connor is here.
Great. And Annie, do you want to say hello as well with CSH?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Annie Bacci with CSH.
Wonderful. And are there other SIF grantees that are on the line? Okay, I know there were some additional folks in the invite. Wasn't sure if folks that participated. How about with CNCS?
Hi, this is Patrick Haynes.
And this is Urban Moore.
Great. All right, anyone else on the line who did not yet have a chance to say hello? All right, well, that is an excellent group today. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and thanks for raising your hand during the roll call so we have a sense of who's here. A lot of great organizations represented, so I look forward to the conversation as we continue. And Jenny, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. All right, so we are going to do a kind of let's call it a round robin and give everybody a chance to pipe up. And if for some reason you don't feel that you're able to share when we get to you, that's perfectly fine. You can just pass, although we hope you won't, but we understand that we may have folks that are at different stages of participation. So would love for folks to share I will call on organizations just for the sake of simplicity, and would love for you to share any current or upcoming RFPs. I know there's a lot out there, or I should say not just current or upcoming, but also recently completed, just for all of us to kind of get a sense of what's out there. I know many of us have had things moving, so it's helpful just to hear kind of what might be out there. And then after you've had a chance to share that, would love to hear thoughts from folks on one or both of the following. So as I kind of noted in the intro, what are you seeing in terms of level of interest and pay for success from the field? Is that shifting? Are you finding that as you have conversations or as folks come to you, they're now talking about kind of different aspects of the work that may be different than what it was before? And then to the extent that you might have been doing outreach to communities recently and have things that you can share about what might be resonating and or have heard from communities reaching out to you, would love to hear thoughts that folks might have on that front. And when I turn to you, if that was confusing in any way, let me know, and we're happy to clarify and help think through. But wanted to give folks a chance to share any information about kind of RFPs, recently closed, either open now or upcoming, as well as your thoughts in terms of interest, outreach, and connection with the field. So why don't we, if this might make our lives a little bit easier, if we can actually go back to the prior slide, and we'll use that as our list for the round robin in terms of order, so folks know when to expect their turn. And sorry to put you on the spot, but Michael, hopefully you or colleagues who may have joined from GHHI wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Sure, no problem. So in terms of our sort of current RFPs, we actually had one out that just closed on Wednesday last week that was developmental support for current or previously SIF-supported PFS projects that address the social determinants of health. And, you know, we reached out and talked with almost everybody, I think, on the phone about potential projects to apply. So we're starting the review process for that RFP right now, and hope to announce some awards next month. And then we've got one more cohort that wouldn't start until the following year. And in terms of, you know, sort of some of the sort of recent outreach around PFS for potential projects and things like that to our organization, I think we've had a lot of requests to do a very rapid, high-level type of feasibility work or early-stage developmental work. We've got a lot of requests on, like, what could we know in 1 or 2 months, basically, or 3 months or something like that, to, like, make it, to find out whether it's worth anybody's time to really sort of go down and go full, you know, speed towards looking at complete feasibility or, you know, developing a project. So we've been, you know, internally trying to sort of, you know, respond to that need that we're getting and trying to sort of see what we can do to sort of get that early sort of answer for folks. and are, trying to sort of, have a couple of projects separate from our SIF projects to sort of see how that might work.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a lot of really interesting points there. I'd be interested to hear what other folks are hearing or thinking about kind of that idea of rapid feasibility or pre-feasibility. And I'll skip, since I know we did not have folks from the Harvard Kennedy School on. I will hold them to the end just in case folks might join.
Yeah, and actually, Rob Koenig from the GPL. Sorry, I was a couple minutes late dialing in.
No problem, Rob. Do you feel prepared to dive in? Otherwise, we can give you a moment. We're just asking folks to share about recent or current competitions and kind of your thoughts on what you're hearing or experiencing in terms of outreach to the field. Yeah,
it's a good question. So I'll start with RFPs. So we don't have any active ones. We just had an RFP close also last Wednesday, like GHHI. And this was part of our overarching RFP that we had posted last October, looking for both feasibility and transaction structuring assistance applicants. And we had 2 rounds of awards we were making through that. The first round, which closed back in late 2016, and we have made a few awards from that. And then this second round, and so this was our second round deadline. And so we got a good number of responses back. We were really excited by what we saw. We are processing them and reading through them right now, and we'll kind of begin the selection process based on what we're seeing. So still hoping to, in the next month and a half, be in a position to make the next set of awards from this process for us. So, and in terms of kind of what we're seeing or noticing more broadly from the field, I mean, I think that we're still getting a lot of requests for kind of innovative or creative applications of the PFS model and PFS capabilities. And I think a lot of our proposals are centered around that, and we're kind of seeing this evolving interest of, not necessarily the very traditional first form of PFS where all investor capital was at risk, but rather moving to kind of a hybrid state where outcomes are still baked into it, where contracts are still structured to align incentives, and where evaluation and learning is a core part of the work, but where investors play a slightly different role.
Great. Thanks so much for diving right in and sharing that. Also really interesting observations. How about from ICS?
So we actually closed out a competition, which would have been our 3rd competition for technical assistance, to offer jurisdictions technical assistance for feasibility studies using PFS. We closed that out last week, Thursday. And I think as far as, what we're seeing with levels of interest, I think that jurisdictions are definitely demonstrating interest and still want to go through with these feasibility studies and see if it's a potential solution for or a potential option for expanding their evidence-based programs. However, we've definitely made it more clear this round than in previous rounds just what it takes to complete a feasibility study, and we've also extended ourselves, as we did for the past for the last 2 rounds, to speak with jurisdictions prior to them submitting applications, and we did see a fall off in jurisdictions who contacted us and spoke with us versus ones who actually applied. So I think that, there's a real realization that in some cases completing a feasibility study and just having the capacity that requires may not be there. So, that's something that we're definitely seeing. But as far as interest, the interest is still there.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's great to hear. What about from LISC?
Hi, this is Anna. So LISC just selected our service recipients, and we're in the process of issuing several follow-on RFPs to select both evaluators and then project-level consultants to help us get our projects ramped up and ready to go. We are going to hopefully issue a couple today, so keep your eyes open for that. And then I think that what we're hearing from the field more than anything is there's a lot of people like us trying to convene different work groups on topics, and I don't know if anyone else has opinions on us kind of coming together and trying to streamline some of them, because that is something that's been taking a lot of our time as well, on top of the work that we're providing to our groups. So that's one thing that's been on the top of our mind recently. And then from our service providers, another thing that we've been discussing with them is how to engage individuals to help fund the ramp-up period costs, because that's sometimes hard to do without having investors lined up or kind of having the back end of the project ready to go.
Can you say just a little bit more about the kinds of opportunities you're trying to streamline? Because my guess is that a number of folks would be interested, but just it would be helpful to get a sense of what sorts of opportunities that you're thinking about.
In terms of
among pay for success technical assistance providers, you mean? Or
yeah, I think that there's
a
lot of working groups that I feel like we're all getting pulled into from different technical assistance service providers, including folks on the call. So I don't know if that's something that other people are feeling like it's a capacity issue from their perspective as a service provider to be on so many different working group calls. But we're kind of a small team, so it's something that's definitely on top of our mind.
Great. Okay. Yeah, we'll note that, and folks can either respond as they provide their info, or we'll have time after we've all had a chance to say a few words to see what follow-up questions or thoughts people might have as well. Great. All right. So how about NFF?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So we had an application that closed a little bit earlier this year. We're looking to announce our awards in early April. I think overall we were really excited about this round of applications. We had some really good responses. And in general, I feel like from the time that we kind of started SIF applications to now, things have really evolved. We're seeing a higher portion of applications that are coming in that had the chance to do some of the great feasibility work with you all. And we're seeing a little bit of a shift in kind of the diversification of the subject matter as well as innovations on the model. So we've seen a higher portion with more direct focus on areas of health and substance abuse. And we're also seeing, smaller projects as well as projects with different roles for investors and back-end payors. I think as far as kind of questions that we're seeing come up in the field a lot, is really a topic that I think we all have beat to death a little bit, which is just that there's still a lot of uncertainty around kind of the political environment and funding streams and how that might affect different projects or project development.
Great, thanks for those thoughts. How about social finance?
Hi everyone, this is Rashmi Karai. A couple of things to update this group on. While it's not a SIF-funded application, I think it's worth noting social finance just recently closed a competition with Octane, which was coming out of the Department of Ed. So we were partnered with Jobs for the Future on that. That was for feasibility work. So hopefully to the extent that those projects successfully complete feasibility and move to transaction structuring, and that's overall supportive for the field. Our upcoming RFP for rate cards closes on April 10th. And we're working with Sorensen, who comes right after us in the roll call, for launching our transaction structuring RFP sometime in the spring. On the kind of prompt questions around interest in the field and outreach strategies, I think I would echo a lot of the other comments that have been made. So no need to repeat those in the interest of time, and happy to let it move on to Sorensen.
Excellent. Thank you for the thoughts and the transition. Sorensen, you are indeed up next.
Great. Yeah, so in terms of RFPs, as Rashmi just mentioned, we have our transaction structuring RFP that will launch here in the springtime. We currently have our feasibility RFP open, and that will be for our third and final cohort under the SIF grant, and that closes on March 31st. And then our ADP data grant is currently accepting applications on a rolling basis for that program. I think in terms of what we're seeing from the field, especially with our feasibility grant, is we're having a lot of nonprofits reach out with interest. So I think kind of the evolving conversation around who can lead Pay for Success and kind of the flexibility in terms of the roles of every stakeholder. I think those transitions over the last couple of years have opened the door for more nonprofits to feel like they can apply and take the lead in applying to that. So that's something that we're really excited about. We've found that actually folks on this call have been really helpful in broadening our network of folks that are applying to the RFP. So NFF has been great in terms of passing along applicants that maybe weren't ready for their structuring grant, but they think we're ready for our feasibility work. And so we're just really grateful for all the partners and the collaboration for folks on the phone today. And we also updated our RFP to make the bar, to relax the bar for applicants. So we, in looking at our feasibility RFP this last round, found that we were asking folks to already have a really targeted target population and already have a lot of data analysis done and really kind of show what they had done, which in thinking about it and reflecting on what our feasibility program was, those are all aspects of Pay for Success feasibility, really starting from, you know, the bottom and looking at what the target population should be and going out and trying to find the right data sources. So we relaxed a lot of those requirements for applicants, and I think that has allowed more governments and nonprofits interest in applying to the RFP. And then just to echo what someone I think said earlier, I think we're finding that folks are interested in feasibility, interested in applying and taking that step to explore Pay for Success, but are still a little bit hesitant and wary about what comes after feasibility, if there's investment money and people out there that are interested in the model still. So I think folks are interested in starting the process towards Pay for Success, but still hesitant as to what it looks like down the road.
And those are all really great and interesting points. Thank you so much for sharing them. And has anyone from the third sector joined us? Okay, looks like they weren't able to join us. And how about Deirdre with NCCD? Would you like to share from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think that I don't know that I have much more to add to all that's already been stated in terms of, you know, the model becoming a little bit more flexible, or the implementation of the feasibility assessment process becoming a bit more flexible. I think that those can be both benefits in terms of opening up audience for interest in feasibility assessment RFPs. I think that there's also some challenges there in terms of where those applicants are and the length of time that the feasibility assessments then take, or the amount of investment that still remains to be able to really comprehensively understand whether or not a specific kind of intervention for a specific population may be of value in terms of this financing model as the mechanism to launch it within a jurisdiction. So, you know, I think NCCD currently is not looking at moving forward with any new feasibility assessments. We're finalizing a couple in the next couple of months. And I think we're interested in staying very involved in the field as a partner for some of the organizations that are on the phone, primarily in feasibility assessments, although potentially also as evaluators. So, you know, I think there's still interest in having this kind of public-private partnership or public-private financing be a tool in the toolkit. I think it's becoming more recognized as one mechanism rather than the most exciting thing, because it's becoming a little bit less novel. I don't know if other people are seeing that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we'll let folks respond to that in just a moment. This is Stephanie again. I'll share quickly just from CSH's standpoint, and then would love to hear follow-up questions or reflections that folks had on what was shared before we keep marching through our agenda. So we launched our RFP as part of the SIF Pay for Success 2 on March 7th, so immediately prior to this call, had our informational webinar, and our really intentionally focusing on data integration, particularly between the criminal justice and homelessness systems, and working with folks at the University of Chicago on creating what will be an open source data platform to match that data and using that as a way to further pay for success exploration or further projects that are already under development, so kind of marrying up a couple of pieces of the puzzle. And I think, in terms of some of those reflections, what's been interesting for us about this effort in particular, but also I would say just in terms of the conversation in the field, to points many of you have made, is where are the other places that this is cropping up and has potential. So in this instance, we're specifically targeting communities that are involved in the data-driven justice initiative, and thinking through how both the kinds of data work needed for pay for success as well as the pay for success exploration or the process of moving that ahead can kind of help align across multiple pieces of the puzzle. And I think that has also allowed us to have some additional sort of ways in which to reach out to communities that are a little bit different than we've seen before. So specifically targeting, local governments as well as those communities involved in data-driven justice and the criminal justice side too, in addition to those interested in pay for success, and kind of seeing where those pieces of the puzzle come together. Was there anyone else that wanted to respond to that prompt on the line that didn't have a chance to? Did I miss calling anyone? Okay. Are there any thoughts that folks wanted to share in follow-up or things that you wanted to respond back to based on what you heard folks articulate? I'm going to take that as a no for the moment, and/or that folks have gotten stuck on mute, but you will have another chance as we come back to the discussion portion of our agenda again shortly. But want to also, as we had the great pleasure of working with Deirdre to, craft this agenda for today, one of the things that came up is this idea about connecting with tribes who I think many of us have had as eligible applicants for the various opportunities we've had, but perhaps, have not seen, kind of as much connection with, and this was something that NCCD has done some work on and reflected on, and Deirdre was kind enough to offer to share some of that experience with this group, and certainly would welcome thoughts and experiences that you all have had too on that front. So Jenny, I think we're ready for the next slide, and Deirdre, I will turn it over to you.
And I did get stuck on mute there for a second, so, but hopefully everyone can hear me now. Yeah. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes talking about a little bit of about the work that we at NCCD have done in terms of trying to reach out to tribes and tribal organizations and Native serving organizations in exploring pay for success feasibility. And primarily one of the reasons that NCCD specifically chose to try and do some outreach to tribes is because our feasibility assessments were focused on the juvenile justice and child welfare systems. And it's well known that Native youth and Native families are significantly overrepresented in both of those systems and the crossover between the systems. And our feasibility assessment specifically was one that we wanted to engage with agencies and with jurisdictions that were interested in reducing the disparities that are seen for youth of color and families of color, whether it's Black or brown kids or Native youth. So even in the beginning, a couple of years ago, as we were starting our first RFP, we were looking at how we could reach out to tribes and tribal organizations, as well as urban tribal agencies or urban agencies that serve tribal families specifically. So just to start, for really basic background, and this is probably all very familiar information to all of you, but there are, 567, there are currently 567 federally recognized tribes, 326 Indian reservations. So some of those reservations have multiple tribes that share the land. Many tribes don't have reservations, particularly up in Alaska. There's just one recognized reservation. Other tribes don't have reservation, although most of the tribes have a hub community that is in a rural or remote area. There's about not quite 5.5 million individuals in the U.S. who recognize themselves as being Alaska Native or American Indian, Native American. This is about 2% of the population. So it's not a huge number, which I think is one of the, I'll sort of recognize it as one of the challenges, is that in the pay for success world, there's frequently value in having a program that can have a larger impact, the economies of scale. We've talked about the challenges of feasibility assessment already and about program launch and ramp up. And so having to absorb that kind of workload and both financial cost and opportunity cost for a large program that can impact, hundreds up to the high hundreds or 1,000 people is easier to really calculate out than if you're looking at trying to implement a program in a small community where your impact may have a high rate of impact in terms of the percentage of people that it'll touch, but the numbers are still small. And I think many of the both tribal communities and in urban settings where there are a high number of Alaska Native and Native American individuals and families, they can still appear to be a very small percentage of the population. The other thing, so that's sort of a bit about, what we know about the size and scope of tribes. And many of the federally recognized tribes, although not all of them, run their own, they receive federal money for things like TANF, they receive federal money for child protection. They'll have their own justice system and their own juvenile justice system. But the challenges there too are that particularly in Indian country, on reservations, many of them don't have the capacity to detain youth, and so those youth can end up in the federal system. And so some of the issues of identifying where the costs are and how to mitigate those or how to capture some of those savings extend not just across a jurisdiction's own government within different agencies or departments, but across multiple levels of governments. And those governments sometimes don't have the same sense of collaboration or see the same level of importance for addressing different challenges. So for a tribe, having a number of their youth in custody can be a really important issue for them to address, and they're willing to put the time and effort into trying to figure out how to do it differently. For a U.S. Attorney's Office who is handling hundreds of high-level cases on a regular basis and are equally as overworked, putting a lot of effort into managing, trying to figure out how to implement a strategy to reduce the number of tribal youth who have to be detained in custody when it's a relatively small number for them anyway, again, is just one of the balancing acts and challenges that can hinder the conversation moving much farther forward than how do we do this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, if we can move the slide to the next one, that would be great. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes just about some of the opportunities that we saw and some of the outreach that we did. I'm then going to spend just a minute talking about some of the challenges that exist with trying to start the conversation or move the conversation forward. And then it would be great if others on the phone have done specific outreach to tribes or have had engagements or have gotten responses or interest from tribes to hear from you all about your experiences and how we might be able to engage this group of folks and the group, agencies, governments, as well as individuals and families. So one of the, some of the opportunities that we know exist primarily because while the Alaska Native and Native American individuals in the U.S. are a relatively small percentage of the population, they unfortunately show up frequently on the list of groups that have higher rates of negative outcomes across a variety of different indicators. So on education, they are less likely to graduate high school on time. They're more likely to drop out. They're less likely to, even when they do graduate high school, they're less likely to attend post-secondary education. And if they do attend, they're less likely to be able to, they're less likely to graduate at all. So on the education front, when we look at some of the Pay for Success feasibility assessments that have been launched, and when we look at some of the Pay for Success projects that I think are in the pipeline, there are some that are focusing on opportunity use and on improving educational outcomes, both early childhood as well as in the high school arena, and for the high school education markers, and then also moving on into the post-secondary education. I think Social Finance is on the phone, and they were talking about their Octay RFP that was launched. So the idea of being able to specifically engage with either a large tribe around this or an urban-based tribal serving organization on this is something that would be, I think, an interesting outreach to do, because tribal members and those who identify as Native American or Alaska Natives in the U.S. experience these negative outcomes or lower rates of positive outcomes across the education sector. The same is true for health outcomes. If we look at some of the data on Alaska Native and the Alaska Natives and the American Indians, they are, it's a younger group of individuals as a whole, so the percentage of their population that are under 18 is higher than the percentage of U.S. Citizens who are under 18. If we look at their average age, like the age at which they're expected to attain, you know, they don't live as long. They have higher rates of things like accidental death as young adults, so higher rates of automobile accidents and drug overdoses. There are higher rates of teen suicide. It's the second highest cause of death for young adults who are Alaska Native or Native American. So again, there's sort of this idea of, if we're looking at Pay for Success as a strategy for being able to improve outcomes and engage with services that can demonstrate a change, the tribal members are a population where we really have an opportunity to move the needle in a substantial way on a variety of different indicators. We can also look at, I think I mentioned, you know, justice, both juvenile justice and adult justice. There's data that indicate that they are overrepresented, and that when they do become involved with the justice system, they penetrate more deeply into the justice system. They stay in confinement longer. The services that are identified, that are available to them are it's more challenging for them to receive culturally appropriate services when they are detained. And then housing is another issue, particularly on reservation, where the quality of housing stock or the ability for the housing to meet the needs of the individuals on the on reservation are challenged, and there's an opportunity there for additional resources to be able to improve not only the housing, but then have that housing ripple through, I think as Green and Healthy Homes has identified, to have an improved housing situation, improve health outcomes, improve educational outcomes, improve community stability, reduce violence. And so, like, those are different ways that we should think about potentially engaging with tribes or tribal organizations to strengthen their the social fabric that exists in their communities as well. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and then I'm going to just open it up for conversation, because, again, I'd be really interested to hear some of the discussion that you all would like to have on this. I want to recognize Clear Sky Native Youth Council for letting me use the graphic on the right side of this slide. I just think it's a cool-looking graphic, and so I decided to borrow it from them. But one of the challenges that exist in terms of engaging with tribes on Pay for Success is capacity and scale. there are a number of tribes or tribal organizations or urban Indian organizations that would be interested in potentially doing this. And I think as we explored, as we got further into some conversations, their struggle was really to think about whether they had a population that was large enough to warrant the investment in infrastructure resources, just in terms of structuring programs, developing the data systems that they needed to develop, and managing sort of the feasibility assessment and the program launch structures to make it worthwhile. So I think that there's a capacity and scale hurdle, and I think that it sounds like many folks on the phone are hearing about that, not necessarily from tribes, but from other communities or service providers or public agencies that would also like to be able to access some of the investment resource to improve outcomes. So it would be great to think about how we might be able to apply some of those lessons learned in Native communities. And I think that the other thing that the capacity issue brings up for me, and it's paired also with resources, really does come back to some of the infrastructure that is available to the tribal government agencies, particularly in terms of data systems and in terms of IT resources to ensure that there is a consistent and valid collection of data on both input in terms of, so you can do some of the analysis for target population, and on being able to evaluate for outcomes. One of the other consistent issues that came up in the conversations that we had with a number of different tribal organizations or tribes in particular was on the question of using evidence-based interventions and their struggle with accepting evidence from mainstream cultures as being equally valid for use in their communities. I think I heard in almost every conversation that I was able to engage in that tribes wanted to be able to evaluate the programs that they believed would work in their communities rather than take a program that had been demonstrated effective in a mainstream community, because they instinctually identify as separate and different from the mainstream communities. And so really wanting to be able to think about, with tribes, about how do we approach pay for success as an evidence building strategy, as well as a scaling strategy for demonstrated interventions. And in some of the international work, as I understand it and have read about it, there is this is a both and strategy. It's not an either or strategy. And so there may be an opportunity with some tribes who are interested to be able to use this not only to demonstrate, to use this as and use the evaluation as an opportunity to demonstrate what's effective in tribal communities or with tribal youth and families that may be different than what we've seen demonstrated effective with the mainstream communities. I think the final thing that just really is an issue that has to be recognized is the challenge of trust in terms of the tribal governments, tribal organizations, and even organizations that are in urban settings, so in Portland or Seattle or some of the larger cities in California, or even in New York, where actually there's a large Native population, but it's also just a very large population. But there's an issue of, when we start to talk about pay for success and a private investment with a back-end payer and paying back, and the challenge that particularly tribal governments have had in entering into and trusting that all parties of a government will stay with an agreement. And this, is an element that when I've been able to be in the room with many tribal elders, there is just a continued challenge of trust in government relations that tinges all conversations. So I think, to think that that won't happen in talking with tribes and tribal organizations about pay for success would really be a missed step. I think it's important that there's be some attempt to acknowledge that. And we definitely moved in that direction as we were talking with particularly tribal organizations about opportunities that may exist. As is evidenced by the fact that we don't have a feasibility assessment with a tribe or tribal organization, we weren't able to really launch this in a way that we wanted to, but I think that we had a lot of great conversations with a number of organizations as well as a number of tribes and tribal government leaders and tribal elders. And I think we're hopeful that others who are more stable in the field of feasibility and transaction building will be interested in trying to continue some of those conversations. And, you know, NCCD, I would be very happy to share names or contact information or other ideas or have other conversations with folks if they're interested. So